It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a fun day today was in GOP fantasy land. Wow, there was the march for the taste of freedom. That's right. Lauren Boebert, the green woman from Georgia, Gates, a whole bunch of GOP faithful angry that the congressional doctor said, hey, in the House, you should wear a mask. You should do that. Since a good number of you are too stupid to get vaccinated, for the good of everybody, we're gonna reimpose a mask mandate. Now the little children, staked out their protest, got their little selfie sticks. They were all marching over to the Senate, where on the Senate side, they don't have to wear masks. Now, as I have understood this, and here's the difference. The Senate, bunch of old white guys, the victims of the pandemic generally, the people who are most at risk, the people who have been vaccinated already. In fact, most of them were vaccinated before any of us could get vaccinated. So in looking at this, if you were a sane, rational person going, this workplace, everybody's vaccinated. They're going to be okay. This workplace, you've got a bunch of dimwits running around wanting to infect everybody else, being children. Maybe we need for their own good, and moreover, the safety of all of the other workers to protect themselves. But, Lauren Boebert marched over with the rest of the Klan to get into the Senate area and proceed to do their photo op of, see, look, we're in the Capitol. We're not wearing a mask. Nah, 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 nah. I mean, that's really what it seemed to me. These grown people doing the childish things where you go, yeah, this is our leadership. Oh, yeah, these are the people who have the free world in their hands. Yeah, I have such faith in these dimwits. In fact, the one guy, I wasn't sure if he was looking at the right side of the camera as he was taking, who knows what he was doing. But it's just sad that the people who are supposed to be our elected leaders, our betters, the smart people that are supposed to lead the country into the future and take care of and solve problems can't even be respectful to each other. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she goes and does this cute little video, which she's got nothing else to do, because the Democrats stupidly threw her out of the committees. At least I think so. She's got nothing to do but make silly little videos. So we're paying her $175,000 a year with healthcare and pension to make TikTok videos. Although, to be honest, she's not worth much more than that. She's going on this, see, there's a magic line. There's a magic line. I have to wear my mask in the house. But when I come over here where the old people are, where the people who are the most vulnerable, I can take my mask off. And she does. And you go, this is exactly what's wrong with our society. This is everything that's wrong with our society right now, because you've got this dimwit who will not say if she's been vaccinated or not. She keeps falling on my HIPAA rights. I wish someone would give her a swift kick in her HIPAA rights. I'll bet you she's vaccinated. I'm not a big better, but I'd put money on it. Because if she wasn't, she'd be the champion of it. But she marches over into the Senate. Now understand, a lot of the southern states are seeing an increase. Georgia not as much as Alabama, where she has been. But she marches over there. And we know that the Delta variant is very contagious. We know that it spreads easily. So if, let's say she is vaccinated, let's say it doesn't affect her. She's carrier. She takes it into the Senate. She kills off a couple of senators. Is that a big deal? I guess it depends on which side of the aisle. I guess at this point, that's where we're going. I'm looking at this and I'm going, at what point do we really start holding these people to some bit of account? I mean, it's insane. But they had their little shindig. They took their little pictures. They made their little points. They had their little fit. Still haven't solved any of our problems, but they got to get their panties in a wad and that. Also, you had the 4Gs, Green, Gates, Gohmert, and Gosar. We'll just call them 4G for now. And if it's like 4G, the Verizon I get for 4G, and it doesn't work, kind of like them. Evidently, they showed up in a prison facility where the terrorists / insurrectionists are being held. They demanded to inspect the facilities. This is the height of entitlement. So 4G shows up. Louis Gohmert, the crazy of the there's part of me as I was watching this interaction, I don't know who's worse. I don't know who's crazier. Gates, who's probably going to jail. Green, who's just flat off her Q rocker and probably going to jail. Gohmert, who's been nuts for years. And Gosar, who you go, yeah, where'd that come from? I don't know which one's crazier. But Gohmert evidently tried to argue with the people at this incarceration facility, this detention center, that he should be allowed in because they didn't let any of them in. And nor should they have. But he tried to make the argument that he's got super secret, top secret clearance, man. He's got clearance. And he should be allowed to come in. He should be allowed to just waltz right into a federal prison and do what he wants, go where he wants, see what he wants, all of that. Because he's got, after all, super secret, super clearance. And they kicked him out. So then he goes on to say that he believes that his people, the terrorists, his clan, his party, the terrorists, were being treated worse than the bloodthirsty terrorists at Guantanamo Bay. Let that sink in for a second. Here's U.S. Congressman going to go to the bat for someone who was ready to take down our government, and in the most dramatic fashion possible. And then accuse, again, remember, the Republican Party is supposed to be the law and order party. They're the party supposedly of law enforcement, of police, of corrections officers, of prisons. They're supposed to be the law and order party. And they're pointing their finger at the law and order community saying, you're treating our people like they're bloodthirsty terrorists, like we did in Guantanamo. Didn't work, didn't get him in. But, it's kind of the rhetoric extreme. And again, they're not talking to me because they're never going to get me on their side. They're feeding the rabid, angry base. They're feeding the grievance radio people. They're feeding the Fox News community. They're feeding those people who want to believe that these people who attacked us on January 6th, these people who broke into our Capitol and tried to stop the certification of a presidential election, that somehow now they're either martyrs or heroes. And I'm not sure which day they're martyrs or which day they're heroes. It's kind of like if the moon's up, they're one side. If the moon's down, they're the other side. It's kind of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing where they're switching positions all the time. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you used to play red light, green light, where, one day, get vaccinated, next day, don't. One day, heroes, next day, martyrs. It's crazy, but it's who they are. One day, don't get vaccinated. We don't care about COVID. We don't care if we die. The next day, the vaccine's going to kill you. Don't do it. It's crazy. These are crazy people. And somehow crazy people have gotten hold of one of the major political parties in this country, and somehow our news media keeps taking them seriously. I mean, at some point, I'm hoping that we just go, you know what? Don't care anymore. Now, interestingly enough, I did see a news report, and I have been wondering. This has been one of those things that's been on my mind for a while now. Whatever happened to crazy Michelle Bachmann? I've been wondering that for a long time because I was a big fan of Michelle. She's crazy as a loon, but I was a big fan. She wasn't. I never saw her as dangerous crazy. I wouldn't have put her in with the 4Gs. I wouldn't have put her in that category. After all, she's got a B as a last name. But I wouldn't have put her in with 4Gs. I thought she was, kooky, out there, I'm going now. Maybe she's right there with the 4G folks. She was interviewed by one of these crazy right-wing pastor church kind of podcasts. And talking about her experience, because she was in the Capitol, she was at the Capitol grounds on January 6th. But her version of it is quite interesting. She just went there to pray. That's all she did. She said, they went, they set up a platform, they had a worship band, they had a number of Christians who came and they prayed and they prayed and they prayed. On the 5th and 6th, she said Washington, D.C. was the happiest place on earth. Happiest place she's ever been. 5th and 6th, happiest place she's ever been. She said, quote, so many people were coming in support of President Trump. So many believers were here. People were witnessing on street corner after street corner. They were witnessing to the gospel of Jesus. And all they really wanted was to uphold the true election, because Jesus wanted the true election. She goes, the day was really, she says, more akin to a family reunion. White supremacists, terrorists, people who came with the intention of stacking up bodies, with the intention of gaining control of the Capitol, of stopping the certification of our election, of hanging Mike Pence. Yeah, a family reunion. Maybe a family reunion of militia kooks and crazy people, but it was happiness, she said. Happiness. People weren't angry. No, she says they weren't swearing, according to her. They weren't planning an insurrection. They were so happy. And they were in prayer, believing that the election results would be the true election results and only would be certified based on what truly happened in that election outcome, she says. So people of faith were here by faith, asking God himself for faith in his true election results. I didn't know God had election results, but according to her, she does. She says that's the real story of January 6th. She said they didn't see normal people breaking in to the Capitol. No. And her argument was, it's the others. It's the Biden people who are doing this. It's all those Biden people. And you go, what in the ever-loving bit of insanity are you talking about? If you followed social media in the days up to January 6th, everyone knew what was coming. I woke up that morning going, how much blood will be in the streets? And she's talking about prayer. Evidently, Jesus wanted us to overthrow the Capitol. That's the only thing I can come up with. That's all I can think of. That's all I can come up with is that Jesus wanted a coup. Now, she asked, what coup? Didn't happen. But here again, this is one of those moments where, which side of this are you going to be on? You're with the police. You're against the police. It wasn't a coup. It was a normal day. I mean, we're in this weird kind of space where up is down and front is back because the faithful, they truly believe, the true believers, whatever it is, they truly believe Donald Trump won because they believe it. And facts be damned. And whatever lie comes out, they're going to buy into. There's this Dan Barton guy who's I hate to call him a historian because I don't really think of him as a historian. Or David Barton is his name. I don't see him as a historian, but they call him a historian. He's claiming that we're going to see very soon, that one single individual cast several thousand votes in Georgia, and that's how Trump lost. So they're gonna unveil the single person, and we're gonna get to it someday. And I'm guessing that's August when they reinstall Trump in the White House. Because again, the true believers, the Michelle Bachmans of the world, they're still buying this stuff. And more importantly, they're still spending money. They're still sending tons of money to Trump. What was it, $75 million he's raised this year to stop the steal, and hasn't spent a dime of it on trying to do any of that? Because he's putting it in his pocket. You got Elise Stefanik on Tuesday starting her, hey, fund me. Never mind what those policemen said. Never mind the horrific stories that they said and the videos that you watch. No. This is Nancy Pelosi's doing, and send me money. Oh, did I mention send me money? Yeah, send me money. And you know what? The faithful are doing it. The people who truly believe that we're holding the martyrs. That it was like just another day on January 6th. Wow. What a crazy time to have one of our political parties lose its mind. But the good thing, taste of freedom. They had their taste of freedom. They marched over to the Senate where they could then breathe on the Senate staff and who knows? If they have the virus, if they don't, they could show that children can do something too. I hope people in their districts look at this and go, how about doing some work? How about, instead of just marching around taking pictures of yourselves, throwing a temper tantrum, how about doing some freaking work? At some point, if that's all you were doing in your job, wouldn't you get fired? It's time to throw these bums out. That's why I say use the power of term limits. Vote them out. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Pete Dominic's going to be here to share some thoughts on the March for Freedom and all the other insanity that we've seen. Quick break. Right back.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day AFSCME sanitation workers in Charlotte, North Carolina, walked off the job. More than 85% of the sanitation workers were black in this predominantly white southern city. It was their third garbage strike in a year. State statutes prohibited union contracts in municipal agencies, but AFSCME was determined to win union recognition and establish an agreement with the city. Southern Director for AFSCME James Pierce thundered, quote, "We'll bring in whatever help we can get if the city tries to break the strike. We can turn this place into a Memphis or a Charleston in a few days." Of course, Pierce was referring to the two victorious strikes by black workers that had rocked the South within the past year. Black sanitation workers in Memphis walked out in a historic strike in the spring of 1968. Hospital workers in Charleston, South Carolina had just won their strike days earlier. Pierce outlined the issues at stake. According to the Asheville Citizen-Times, the Charlotte City Council had adopted its final budget without providing dues checkoff, without adhering to established grievance procedures or seniority rights, and without adding important safety precautions for garbage collection. At first, Charlotte's mayor asserted claims that the strike was about dues checkoff, but Pierce shot back about broken promises regarding the establishment of safety committees and non-discrimination enforcement. By the end of the month, a tentative agreement was in place. Strikers won all demands except dues checkoff. But as hospital workers soon found out in Charleston, South Carolina, the city council refused to carry out its agreement with the union. Sanitation workers in Charlotte would strike twice, unsuccessfully, over the next year and a half. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, this story made me laugh. I had wondered, I found out where Michelle Bachmann's been. She's still doing crazy stuff. But now you've got this guy, Milo Yiannopoulos. I can never say his name right. He was the guy who, during the Republican convention in 2016, sat down and said, so what are we going to talk about? I go, well, we're going to talk about how much I don't like you and how much the GOP is destroying this country. And he looked at me and goes, well, we're not talking. He got up, he walked away. I'm like, damn it, I should have saved that because I didn't even really know who he was at the time. But that was fun. Evidently now he's an ex-gay. He was, at that moment, he was flaming. He was prancing. He was doing all that stuff. And good on him. Do your thing. Now he's ex-gay, according to him, and ready to partner up with a Florida church to do an audiobook of him reading the Bible. He's going to set up a gay conversion program down in Florida at some point. It's being reported, where he's evidently going to, I guess, burn people like he claims he did to himself to stop being gay, which is just weird. But hey, he needs the attention. Mom must not have breastfed him as a kid. Just a weird thing. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the March for Freedom that happened today in the U.S. Capitol. I've asked our good friend Pete Dominick to come talk with us. Pete's a stand-up comic, also the host of the fabulous Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Pete, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, great to see you. I will always make time for you and for your wife.
Yep, you're a great dude. I appreciate you taking time for us, man. So what do you think of, let's start with Milo. What do you think of Milo now? Milo not gay? Now going to read the Bible, going to conversion church, going a different route.
That story made me sad. That story makes me sad. I am sad by anybody who can't be, as close to their true self as they want to be. And, the idea that you can be an ex-gay, he's so desperate for money and for a grift that he's come up with a life grift, which is to deny who he is, which is a gay person. And now, reading the Bible for money. I mean, how far has this guy fallen? It's just terrible. It's a terrible thing to create the idea that you can be anything, or, in terms of your sexual orientation. Obviously you can always improve yourself, so I don't want to say that, but I mean, that's not improving yourself. So the idea that you're going to put it out there to somebody who's struggling with their sexuality, who thinks they're alone, the only, really struggling, some young person maybe thinking, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Well, he didn't do it. He's not ex-gay. He's still gay. And by the way, I pranced out here, so I just want to say nothing wrong with prancing. Not that you were saying that, but
you do, brother.
But to be fair, I'm also sexually attracted to three to five specific men, including Tom Brady. But listen, the idea that you're going to create false hope for young people that are struggling with coming out is dangerous. It's cruel, and it's for him selfish because it's not true. We all know that he is bullshitting all of us. So it's just sad if it weren't so awful.
Yeah. And it's, at the end of it, you hit it right at the beginning. It's about money. It's a grift. It's him just trying to rip somebody off. And look, to me, that's the story of the GOP. I mean, I look at Tuesday when you had these horrific stories of these police officers, and you've got Elise Stefanik coming out going, hey, let's have a fundraiser. Send me money.
Yeah, I mean, more importantly, coming out and blaming Nancy Pelosi. They did this with Hillary Clinton as well. On Benghazi, they said that she turned down security forces, and that's what they're saying about Nancy Pelosi. She knew there could have been danger, and she turned down extra. Neither of which happened. It didn't happen. First of all, second of all, they're just obfuscating what everybody saw with their own eyeballs. For months that the president of the United States kept repeating a thing over and over that was clearly untrue, and got people to believe it to the point where they then had a date set, organized, and paid for. And then he told them to head up to the Capitol. And then he probably told his Secret Service agents to, if there's any danger at all up there, then the first thing we got to do is whisk old Mike Pence out of there. And, I want you to bring him to a safe bunker in Alaska so that the election couldn't get certified until whatever happened. I don't know I do think that in his deepest, darkest fantasy, Donald Trump and maybe Donald Jr. or maybe one other sycophant that works with him really thought that those guys were going to somehow take over the Capitol and hold Nancy Pelosi ransom until they, made him president again, or whatever deep, dark bullshit he made himself believe. I think there's something to that. And it's awful. The whole thing is horrendous that so many people believe Donald Trump, that the election was rigged and stolen from him. It's terrible for our future elections all the way up and down, local and state and federal. And watching these testimonies this week was heartbreaking. And the only thing, not really, but the only thing more heartbreaking was people, criticizing Adam Kinzinger for becoming emotional. It's like men don't cry. I heard a lot of that this week. So yeah, they do cry. And I was one of those men crying on Monday or whatever day it was, Tuesday, during the hearings. It was awful.
Well, it was awful. But the thing that gets me is you've got an entire political party in this country, sans two people who are bought and sold and on this crazy train that today, a bunch of them got together in the House and they had their March for Freedom or their Taste of Freedom March or whatever the heck that was, with their little selfie sticks and their cameras for their photo op to march over to the Senate so they could take off their masks.
Rick, what did they mean when they use the word freedom?
I really have no idea what they mean by freedom, other than hooray for me and the hell with you. I get to do whatever I want without regard for anything having to do with you.
Right. Freedom from cooperation, freedom from collaboration, freedom from my neighbor. And what I hear with freedom is, and I also hear this with national security. Are you strong on national security? Only if you have good healthcare system. Because my threat to me and to my family, the thing that's most likely to put us in danger are health issues, not a terrorist attack. No, health issues. So for me, national security is a strong universal healthcare system. And freedom is freedom to not have to work next to somebody who's going to get me sick by choice. The idea that they defined freedom partly by I think the way that you described it really well, and by several other definitions of, the government confiscating my taxes or freedom to not have to wear a mask. And it's like, no, these are silly definitions of freedom. They are individual freedoms, and we have collective freedoms, and we need to have a more thoughtful conversation. I mean, pathetic the way that they talk about freedom and liberty and all that. It's such a grift. It's so stupid. It's insulting to our intelligence, the way that they throw the word around freedom around, regarding, being able to have whatever gun they want, however many bullets they want, to drive whatever they want, wherever they want, and not have to listen to anybody tell them, quote, what to do. That's really the other issue. Freedom from having anyone telling me what to do. You're not my dad. No, I'm not, but this is my convenience store and you have to wear shoes, fuckface.
Dude. Terrestrial radio. But I'm with you on everything else. Because that is really their idea. And Marjorie Taylor Greene marching from the House side to the Senate side, taking off her mask in the Senate side, is the ultimate childish game, knowing that she could be bringing the virus with her into a chamber of old people who are the ones who are potentially the victims of this.
Well, listen, before Marjorie Taylor Greene was a congresswoman, do you know what her job was?
I actually don't know.
The original Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. She's made of straw, Rick. She's just a straw man, straw woman. She is just, you mentioned, Buchanan earlier? What's her name? How quickly we forget her.
Michelle Bachmann.
Michelle Bachmann. Remember when she was the craziest person?
I loved her. She was as crazy as you could, a little alone. But I never thought she was this kind of danger crazy.
Well, these people are way, way more crazy than she was. She was really crazy. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and and Chip Roy and Gohmert and Lauren Boebert, and there's more. There's several, and then if they're not crazy enough, like this woman who is somewhat moderate, Mace she represents Charleston, South Carolina, and more in South Carolina. She lightly criticized Trump after the insurrection, and there was backlash, and so she went way off the deep end. And so if they're not appropriately conspiratorial, bigoted, and absolutely out of their minds about the most ridiculous stuff, then they're going to lose. They can't win re-election. If you're not crazy enough, they'll primary you with someone crazier. It's like if you say, something crazy like Trump won the election was rigged. And if that's not crazy enough, because some, person that's running against you is like, listen, the moon is made of cheese. And if you don't agree with it, if you don't come all the way over to moon is made of cheese, we're going to primary you, because it's not enough to say that Trump didn't win the election, that climate change isn't real, and that trickle-down economics don't work, and that wearing a mask and vaccination, you're getting microchipped. No, the cow jumped over the moon, and if you're not with me on that, then we're going to primary you. It just gets crazier and crazier and crazier, because they're all led by the crazy folks on YouTube and on the internet, on Fox News, on Newsmax. Those guys come up with crazy stories in their writer's room. They pitch them at 7, 8, and 9 o'clock at night. They reverberate all day on all these other shows, and they just get nuttier and nuttier. Alex Jones, crisis actors. It's just never-ending flow of vomit at them that makes them more and more extreme.
No, you're absolutely right. And every one of them, if you saw them on their march for the taste of freedom, all of them had their cameras. They were all doing their live streaming, taking their selfies, all so that they can do a lot of just what you're talking about, so that they can rise up and ultimately make more money. Because ultimately this comes down to money.
Yeah, it comes down to, I mean, some of them, I think a lot of them really are principled. They're principled about crazy things. Crazy things. I mean, so many of today's Republican Congress are 100% educated by their own life experience, and which is fine. Everybody can come with it, but mainly that. So if they experience one thing one time somewhere, they're making policy on that. But more importantly, they're educated by Sean Hannity, and worse, Tucker Carlson, and worse, Alex Jones, and worse, hardcore outspoken white supremacists. Those are the people that raised Madison Cawthorn. Those are the people that educated Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. They are just spouting Hannity. Yeah. They have no idea about public policy. They have the words public health, a master's in public health, they would never listen to somebody who has that. Never. Yeah, they would only listen to their favorite talker.
Yeah, and I would argue even worse than them, the evangelical community who's Jesus wanted the insurrection.
Or even, I mean, I'll rail harder than that. I've always been, a pretty hardcore atheist person. I mean, I'm agnostic in terms of what I believe, but I definitely, think that even if you believe some of the crazy stuff about mainstream Christianity, moderate Christianity, that's pretty crazy to believe that stuff too. So of course you're going to be more likely to believe other things as well. I mean, but I remember when I found out the truth about Santa and the Easter Bunny. I don't know who's listening. I don't want to destroy, innocent children's lives, Rick. But I remember when I learned that, and I remember thinking, oh man, can't even believe I bought that. That's so, it's like critical thinking. You start to learn, you start to understand how to be a reasonable person, and then you actually get educated on things, and then you start to rely on data and expertise, and it's just not part of the Republican Party or the conservative movement, which is no longer the conservative movement. It is the Trump cult. It is him, and he, by the way, also follows whatever the pundits say. He's not making, throwing these things out. He's not coming up with these ideas. He knows that a lot of his people are anti-vax and white supremacists. Yeah,
so here are we at this moment then? Because if they are the anti-vax people, and I know they are, is this how we get rid of some of them? Let them all get sick, let them die. We can turn Florida, Texas blue.
No.
Not going there?
No, because the death rate isn't that high. It's just not that high. It's not high. It's not high enough that I think it affects the outcome of a vote in any district at any level, I'm guessing. So that's, something that the most craven among us could wish for. But even then, I think if you look at I don't think this movement is unfortunately dying, because there's always going to be some young ass person jerk, who Charlie Kirk, for example, who's got millions and millions of young people watching him say that Simone Biles is a sociopath. That's what he said, and like, whatever, he'll just say whatever he can to get people, and it'll always work. And so I'm not saying that we should give up. I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to dominate, but I'm saying it's not going to die out to the point that it affects the outcome of an election. And COVID is not going to kill enough anti-vaxxers either. It's just it's not that deadly. It's deadly for sure, and it can make you very sick and long-term illnesses. But it's, I don't think that it's that kind of numbers, and generally speaking, still, even though it's affecting younger people now, still generally killing, older voters as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, we'll see. I mean, but it's raging in the places where where they are.
You feel terrible. I feel worst for. It's very easy for those of us who are liberal snobs, and I'm talking about myself, to just look down on them and say, "Fine, die." But then, if you're going to be so stupid that you're not going to get it. But then I always, as soon as I feel that way, and I do think that to myself sometimes, if I'm being honest, I immediately think about the dedicated people working in the hospitals who thought they had this beaten and thought they weren't going to have to deal with this. And now their hospitals are overrun in places in Florida and Missouri right now, in Arkansas. And I feel terrible for those people, because they're just, frankly, they didn't sign up for that. Yeah. I don't think most healthcare, workers signed up for, walking literally into combat and potentially getting sick and dying just from going to work. And so I feel really terrible for them.
What's amazing to me is, how fast the news cycle changed. Infrastructure on Wednesday, the March for Freedom today. Tuesday seemed like a long time ago. That's what bothers me, because we've already lost the outrage that should have come from Tuesday's testimony.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't yet, I'll say. I mean, that Tuesday's testimony was so powerful and so impactful to anybody who watched it, to most people who watched it. And the credibility that police officers supposedly have, especially on the right, should matter. I do think that'll matter. I think that it matters that there were, let's say, white police officers up there saying, what they said. I think that does matter to enough people. And I think that this is going to go on, and it's frankly entertaining if it wasn't so horrific. And so the point being, keep it going if you're Democrats. Remind them of who they are and what they did, and never let them forget it, because of what you said. It's easy to move on, but let's keep having these hearings. And the Republicans certainly did it really well, arguably damaged Hillary Clinton with the whole Benghazi affair, which wasn't even a thing, and this was a thing. This was an attack on the capital of the United States. And by the way, the one thing that's kind of depressing, when I tend to forget this fact, the rest, you ever do this, Rick? The rest of the world watched that.
Yes.
I always forget that. I always get so insulated, and it's easy to as an American, the world, revolves around us. The rest of the world saw those terrorists attack the Capitol to overturn our election, led by a person who paints his face in a natural color.
I'm still hoping there'll be some perp walks. I'm not overly confident, but I'm hoping it does. But Pete, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing some thoughts. Always great talking with you, my friend.
Pleasure to join you, Rick. Thank you very much for having me. Great work, buddy, as always.
Good stuff, as always. Our good friend Pete Dominick, stand-up comic. Make sure you check out his podcast, Stand Up with Pete Dominick. We'll get links out on how you can do that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1956. That was the day that an oil tank explosion took the lives of 19 men fighting a fire at the Shamrock Oil and Gas Company in the northeast of Dumas, Texas. Dumas was in the Texas Panhandle, oil boom country. The day after the tragedy, the Chicago Daily Tribune carried the story of what happened. 4 huge petroleum tanks exploded today, bathing 19 men in a super hot wall of flame and killing them in their tracks. The towering orange fireball of the first explosion was sighted in Amarillo, 40 miles away. The events that triggered the explosion started when a flammable gas caught flame and flared into a small ground fire at Shamrock. Employees and volunteer firefighters tried to stop the blaze, but despite their effort, the fire grew. Just before 7 in the morning, a 12,000-barrel tank exploded. This ignited another 20,000-barrel tank, and then 2 more. 15 of those fighting the fire died instantly. 4 others later succumbed to their burns. Many more were injured. A news editor on the scene described what he saw, writing, quote, "A bright orange mushroom boiled up, floating in heavy black smoke, and I prayed those firefighters would get out alive, but some didn't." 8 who died were Shamrock employees. The other 11 were volunteer firefighters. Today, a memorial bearing their names pays tribute to those who died. An inscription reads, quote, "But whether on the plains so high or in the battle's van, the fittest place where man can die is where he dies for man." In 2015, 68 firefighters died while on the job protecting people and property throughout the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Over the years, we've talked about corporate America, basically buying our institutions. And in fact, I'd always said that, the Koch brothers spent millions of dollars buying, economics departments across the country. In fact, one of them, Florida State University, they gave like $2 million to Florida State. And for that little investment, they, for a while, actually had veto power over any economics professor hired in that department. And you go, wow, that's real power for what to them was really pennies. And corporate America has done a pretty good job of, with just some pennies, figuring out how to pervert or soil any institution because, hey, we're all broke. We don't tax them anymore. We beg from them. And this most recent story that I came across over at the Prospect magazine is one of those things that made me go, yeah, this is corporate America again doing what they do well. The story's about the Juul company, the people who made e-cigarettes, basically buying an entire edition of the American Journal of Health Behavior and then just putting all their stuff in it and giving it away. And I'm going, I know why, but why would the American Journal of Health Behavior do that? And here to share some thoughts on, why this happens, how it can happen, and what it means and what we should be doing about it. I've asked David Dayen to come talk with us. David is the executive editor of the American Prospect. Their article is the one on the Juul story. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So am I getting this right? This American Journal of Health Behavior paid I think it was like $50,000, $55,000 so that they could just fill an entire edition of this journal with their propaganda?
Yeah. This was kind of buried in the middle of a New York Times story about how Juul is up against a ruling at the FDA to whether or not to allow their e-cigarettes to be sold over the counter anymore. Because of the deep addiction that it has caused in particularly among adolescents. And there was just this note that said, yeah, Juul paid $51,000 to have the whole May-June issue of this journal, the American Journal of Health Behavior, devoted to 11 studies that were funded by the company. And that's all it wrote. And so I decided to look into it a little more, and it was even worse than the Times discussed. You can just go to that website of the American Journal of Health Behavior and find the entire issue. It's 219 pages. There are 26 named co-authors on the 11 studies. All of them are paid by Juul. They're either full-time employees or they're consultants who work directly with Juul Labs. And all of the studies make the same exact claim that Juul's products help existing smokers quit, and therefore it has a public health benefit, ignoring the other half of this, that Juul's products also addict a whole generation of young people who never smoked in the first place. So this is a pretty standard example of pure academic corruption.
No, and it's crazy. But as I was reading through this, and I know this stuff happens, but I don't think I've ever seen such a blatant practice. This happening in an entire edition where everything, front to back, was on that same vein, where there were no other voices, and then arguing that this is kind of a peer-reviewed kind of publication.
Yes, and that was an interesting part of it, that this journal, prides itself on its ethical guidelines. They have a whole listing at the site. But this is one of these particular kinds of academic and scientific journals where the authors have to pay in order to get published. In fact, there's an entire fee schedule at the website that says if you've been accepted to submit an article, you have to pay $900 to put it on. So the $51,000 that Juul paid was really only a little bit more than what the American Journal of Health Behavior reaps every time that it publishes one of its issues. It gets money from the academics, and that can obviously lend itself to the very extreme level of corruption that you see in this Juul case.
It's crazy, but you look at this and you look at these journals and these are supposed to be the place where you have these intellectual debates, and the peer review process is supposed to keep you honest and true, and yet it just looks like propaganda, and for cheap. I mean, I am amazed at how cheap it is to buy someone's soul. I mean, this I don't know how long this publication has been around, but for $51,000 to put it in there, and then I guess $6,500 to allow anyone to read it. So for what, $57,500, you can literally buy this publication's soul for an entire episode.
Yeah, and it's been around for 45 years, and it's not the only kind of academic publication that uses this model. In this case, this was so egregious that this did cause some upheaval at the journal. The editor of the journal had to resign and actually recently sold the journal. 3 other editors stepped down from the organization. And I have learned since this article came out a whole bunch of other very strange aspects of this story that the reviewers who, this is supposed to be peer reviewed, right? So the reviewers were paid to conduct their review in a very short period of time, literally in 1 week, so they could wrap it up before this FDA ruling, so that this academic paper could be sent out to members of the FDA advisory committee, so that they could know that these studies were out there. And the reviewers have not been disclosed, even though academics have asked who were the peer reviewers of these articles. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
And this has been sort of a minor controversy within the academic world. But whether or not this worked is going to be determined by what the FDA decides, right? Because if the FDA says, yes, we saw this information, and based on these studies, we believe that there is a public health benefit to Juul, and we're going to allow you to stay on store shelves. And at that point, Juul really paid next to nothing to save their business.
Yeah. No, and look, I don't want to get into the whole whether Juul is good for you, bad for you, if it helps, because I've got friends who swear by it. Saved my life, I have friends who say, and I've got other people who say, they're hooked on it. And I don't know the difference between e-cigarettes and vaping, and I don't want to get into any of that. But for me,
it's really it's a cost-benefit analysis, right? I mean,
right.
You could say two things could be correct: that Juul is effective in getting longtime smokers to put down combustible cigarettes and pick up, a vaping machine. But it might also be true that these things are so addictive and are in fact marketed to an adolescent market that they are too dangerous to be on store shelves for anybody to buy. I mean, the happy medium might be that you make them prescription available.
No, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
But for me, the more important part of this is not so much the product itself, but the fact that this stuff happens and that the institutions that are supposed to be out there that to protect us from this kind of propaganda have sold their souls. So I got to ask you, how pervasive is this practice in other publications? Because look, I get a number of peer-reviewed journals that I look at, and now I'm wondering how many of them are sold.
I mean, it's funny because even the American Journal of Health Behavior admits in its frequently asked questions page that this pay to publish model has become a real scourge, that it's designed as a for-profit model to generate revenue without regard to science, really. And they admit that that's a problem, but then they justify their own version of this by saying that, hey, we're a little organization. We don't have a big membership base. We're not the American Medical Association or anything like that. And so we have no other choice. If we want to put out a journal, we have to charge the authors. And so it puts you into this box where the only way that you can put out this information for the public is through a model that's easily corruptible.
The other question I had is, and I've never heard of the American Journal of Health Behavior, but I have to say it sounds an awful lot like one of those euphemistically named groups that were created with a specific task in mind. And it sounds like, about 45 years ago, since that's what you said, they've been around. Sounds like the tobacco hearings. Sounds like something the tobacco industry started themselves to save cigarettes, and now they're using it to save these vaping e-cigarette things.
Well, I don't know that that's the case, but I will say that when you talk about e-cigarettes and you talk about the tobacco industry, increasingly you're talking about the same thing. I mean, Juul is staked with a 35% investment from Altria, who is the maker of Marlboros. So, it's a category unto itself. It's not just there's a tobacco industry and a vaping industry. There's one sort of sin industry, and they're all buying each other's, they're all invested in each other's products.
So let me ask you the other side of this, because, there's got to be a policy part to this. Is this, something that should be somewhat regulated, somewhat brought out? Because, I'm looking at the dishonesty factor here. Is this something that should have to be disclosed? Do you see anything that brings this to light without someone like you having to uncover it?
Well, it's a difficult question. I mean, the sponsorships were disclosed. This was not like a deep investigative study by myself. If you went to every single article, the conflicts were put right in the article. I mean, that's how I know that everybody was a Juul employee or was paid by Juul. There's no violation necessarily of advertising law here, as long as the sponsorship is adequately disclosed. And it's an interesting thing. Like, if the target was the general population and you did this kind of thing, that could be misleading marketing. But if it's a scholarly journal that's designed for experts, there's this sort of understanding within the law that they're sophisticated enough to just get a disclosure and then look through it. And, I talked to a professor from Harvard Law School who said that it's common wisdom that doctors are among the easiest to fool because they have supreme self-confidence that they would not be scammed because of their intelligence. So it seems like we take out sort of some underpinnings in the law around scholarly journals and around anything where the target is the expert community, when the expert community brings their own biases and their own blind spots to things as much as the general population.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to how cheap it seems to buy the soul of anything. Our Congress people, our education institutions, these journals. It just seems. I mean, 51 grand is pennies when you're talking about a company as large as Juul and the owner of Marlboro.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the key here is the intended audience is clearly the FDA. And now that this has become more known through the media, will the FDA understand the degree to which this research was the product of a pay-to-play relationship? And will that color their decision-making process when they decide whether or not to allow Juul to remain on store shelves? I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road here. And of course, the FDA, we have seen has in recent memory been swayed. The Alzheimer's drug Aduhelm that the FDA recently approved, which many experts say has no basis in as a treatment for Alzheimer's. And it's so expensive and Alzheimer's is so widespread that it could literally bankrupt Medicare. I mean, these are serious decisions that the FDA has to make. And in the case of Juul, it's a decision that could affect millions of young people. And so whether or not they have an understanding of where the information is coming from, who is behind it, who is backing it, and whether it can be accepted as independent research is really crucial.
I now am going to be. I got something that I now got to look out for that I didn't even know was coming. When are we expecting a decision on this? When are these decisions coming down? Do we think?
It looks like the decision will be made sometime before September, probably like early September.
So I would guess that any input period is over at this point, right?
Yeah, it's not quite that kind of thing because it's more of an administrative ruling than a rule making. It's just and basically Juul has written an application to allow as a going concern as a consumer product, and the FDA has to decide on that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, but again, this is one of those things that corporate America gets away with. And usually we don't find out until after it's over with. But good on you for picking this up and putting it out. Folks, I'll take a look at it over at the American Prospect. The story, Juul taking academic corruption to a new level, written by David Dayen, the executive editor over at the American Prospect. We'll get links out on social media. David, I appreciate the time, the work that you do. I hope you'll come back again real soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day the United Farm Workers, led by Cesar Chavez, signed their first union contract in California. It was a milestone victory for agricultural workers. Farm workers, often Mexican immigrants, had very strenuous working conditions. They worked long hours in the fields for extreme poverty wages. In the event that housing was provided, it was often unsanitary and of very poor quality. Filipino organizers sought to improve working conditions for agricultural workers. After the U.S. colonized the Philippines, many Filipinos were recruited to work on California farms. They began organizing as early as the 1930s, forming the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. The Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee reached prominence by the 1950s. At the same time, Mexican-American Cesar Chavez, along with Dolores Huerta, founded the National Farm Workers Association to organize the Mexican workers who were increasingly dominating the labor force in the fields. The Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee went on strike against the grape growers near Delano, California. Their goal was to get a raise of 20 cents per hour. When the owners refused to negotiate, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee reached out to Chavez. The two groups merged to create the United Farm Workers. The United Farm Workers Union was able to get the support of many in the public through a boycott of California grapes. While the boycott lasted some 5 years, years, grape growers received considerably negative press and suffered financially. As a result, on July 29, 1970, growers agreed to a contract with the United Farm Workers, the first such agreement in farm labor history. So the next time you're enjoying those tasty grapes, think about the workers and their brave efforts to unionize farm workers. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.